a problem. Everything is jazz and I'm Stockton.
They may not be somebody that you totally expected from day one.
Everybody in the middle, everybody down. That's right. What you gonna do? That's right. Baby, I'ma spend it all with you. Yeah, and I'm headed to the other side where the grass is always greener.
We have a special guest today on this month's COPO Talk. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Ian. I am the Public Relations Officer for the 44th Cabinet for this year. It's an honor to be here.
And we're going to be talking about Asians in America, whatever that conversation may turn to, and we're just going to have a talk about it. I initially wanted to have this conversation, or why I wanted to have an episode like this. I think clearly it's very prevalent in the news and like social media nowadays that there has been like a high rise of Asian hate crimes recently. I mean, I guess like as an individual, it's just like kind of crazy how we're still perceived as disposable in this society.
What do you mean disposable?
Disposable as in like we don't have really like any voices. People think that we're submissive and stuff like that, that we don't have an opinion and that we are also well off. And I think that's the biggest thing that is misconceptualized, is that Asian Americans and Asians in general are very well off. Yeah. And I think that has to do with maybe the model minority myth.
Yeah. I think like taking in like the hate crimes into consideration, like just imagine if that was like, you know, like your mom or like your dad, especially with like the elderly too, like they're defenseless. Like we don't even see any like this covered in the media.
Why isn't it as publicized in the media as, you know, someone that's living in the Bay Area? It's crazy how it's happening in the most diverse, you know, areas. I
think for my family, like especially, I don't think they're the ones to really like speak out about it, just because like, I don't know, it's kind of like hard to gauge where they stand on it, because like I've never really like talked or had like a serious conversation like that with my parents, what it was like coming to America. But you don't really like get to feed into what they were like truly feeling. Yeah. And I guess all of like the pressures like socially and like societally, like what they were going through.
I remember like listening to this podcast once, and it was this dude kind of talking about how not only the recent like Asian hate crimes, but also with, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement. I personally have challenged my parents, you know, pushed them a little out of their comfort zone. Like, why don't y'all talk about this? Yeah. Do y'all, what is your stance on that? When I was like listening to this podcast, this dude was talking about how, again, the privilege that we get to have to not worry about, you know, our parents when they immigrated here, or like a lot of people that immigrated here, you know, they had to deal with all that hate, but had to ignore it because they had to focus on making a life out here and giving us a life. So we can't expect them, apparently, you know, we can't expect them to, you know, go out and protest and, you know, use their voice, because that can, you know, that can mess up their chances of making a life out here. Not saying that that's, you know, that's okay, but it's like, you know, times are changing. People don't speak out. People didn't speak up about a lot of things, even when I was growing up. I feel like personally, I've been resentful of my parents for not having an opinion on so many things. I'm like, oh, we need to defy stereotypes. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, you know, we can't prove these people that, you know, Asian Americans and Asians are always so silent, and like, you know, we can be, you know, beat around and stuff like that. Yeah. And I guess it's just like how we kind of like approach it. And I think our generation also needs to understand the why of why it was like that, you know, or why it's been instilled in our, you know, parents and our grandparents for so long. It's just interesting.
And that's like something you can't really kind of like force out of them, or it can't be like a dramatic change. You know what I mean? Because like it's kind of like been instilled in their heads in about how many years now, like 10, 15, even 20 years. Right. Like they've probably had like the same what's the word for it? I guess like the same perspective that they have been having. And it's hard, like, especially like, yeah, there's a lot of like messed up things happening now.
Right.
But to be able to kind of like challenge their perspective and challenge their stance after like a solidified 15, 20 years of thinking a certain way, and having their children tell them like, oh no, that's wrong, we think this way, it's because it's right. It's most definitely difficult. And change and growth is something that doesn't happen overnight, especially with like sensitive issues that are happening today. If their children are telling them like, oh, like this is how you should think about this topic this way, because one, it's the most humane way to approach it, and two, it's the right and just way to think about it too.
Right.
And then once that change happens, you know what I mean, like it can be spread.
I think when, we bring up those like issues or topics to like our relatives and, stuff like that, like, oh no, body shaming and like, what's it called? Being accepting of the LGBTQIA community and, a lot of things that go against like religious views and stuff like that. I think they reject it so much at first. And I think how we need to better like, I guess like face that kind of, conflict is kind of asking them like, how did they even get to that point of, not being able to have those conversations. And I think that also, again, it's like, it's one of those things where it's just like, it's like a very, thin line. It's like a gray area. I think there's a difference of like blatant like brainwashing, and that makes it, at this point, it's starting to be like not excusable that we were in a way brainwashed by the government like 60 years ago, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's getting to the point where it's like, understanding how we became so anti-Black, how we became so ignorant, and it's because our community strives so hard to be exactly like the white man. Yep. But now this year I really understood like there's a reason why they are that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They were not allowed to think for themselves, to have an opinion.
How do you feel about the lack of media coverage on the topic of the Asian hate crimes that's been happening?
The capacity of it, like the rise of it, skyrocketed, like for sure. Like, and I think that has to do a lot with our leadership this past 4 years. I think the biggest difference is the reason why a lot of our opinions are stifled in a way is because a lot of people in our community don't speak a lot of English too. They still don't. That doesn't mean they don't know what is happening. You know what I mean?
That's honestly like on Instagram too, especially like you see all of these victims of like hate crimes,
right?
And it's just like it gets
normalized?
Not normalized, but it gets very mentally draining just knowing that there's another person that has to go through this, and like
and again, I think it's like it's emphasizing. I think it really does show the emphasis of giving into that model minority thing. You know what I mean? Like not allowing the community to feel what they're feeling, and not being able to speak upon it, I think is a really big thing. That hate it's always been there. And that's the thing that people don't understand, you know what I mean? Like, it's only getting covered because it's caught on tape, because it's murder, because it's a beating, because they were defenseless. I think it's just, like how you're mentioning, taking a step in the right direction, educating in the right way of like our faults, but how we came there, the journey of how we got there.
How it got to that point.
How it got to that point, exactly. So, it's important to speak up, amplify the voices of those around you. That concludes our 6th COPO episode. We hope y'all enjoyed that little podcast or little conversation that we had. If you have any suggestions or comments, please listen down below. But yeah, thanks for joining this month's episode. It was really great having Ian Garcia, Public Relations Officer. We post videos every single month, so be on the lookout for that. Again, stay safe and peace.